When I started this channel, my goal was to cover the wide spectrum of vintage Pokemon decks from the beginning at base set and track the multitude of decks that popped up throughout set releases moving towards the EX era, which was my all-time favorite block of the Pokemon TCG. And here we are, the EX era. This era of the TCG spanned 5 competitive seasons and 16 sets, beginning with EX Ruby and Sapphire in June of 2003. Wizards of the Coast had lost their license to produce and manage the Pokemon TCG, and the Pokemon Company International now had the monumental task of bringing the TCG back to the forefront of popularity on a global scale. The Game Boy Advance games were definitely assisting in this endeavor. Players old and new were ready to see their new Gen 3 favorites in print, in card form, and needless to say, they were not disappointed. On top of new Pokemon being represented for the first time, TPci also introduced new rule changes that are still in place today. Confusion was rightfully nerfed as a special condition in how it handled retreating. In case you don't know, before 2003, a Pokemon had to discard the appropriate amount of energy to retreat before flipping a coin. If tails, the Pokemon could not retreat, and you would just lose the discarded energy. It wasn't a huge issue since you had so many gusting and switching effects in the metagame all throughout the early vintage eras, but it was still a much needed change. The mulligan rules were clarified to be more precise, and the number of cards that may be drawn after an opponent's mulligan was reduced from 2 to 1 per mulligan. So prior to 2003, if your opponent took a mulligan, you could draw up to 2 cards per mulligan, which would give you a really unfair amount of card advantage, and so that was another area of the TCG that definitely needed to be workshopped. And let's not forget the namesake of the EX era, Pokemon EX, a new type of Pokemon that traded higher power and bulkier HP for an additional prize card awarded to the opponent for knocking one out. A new, interesting set of tools for players to mess around with and balance against single prize decks. Not to mention that Pokemon EX were completely blinged out as cards, so if you loved holofoil, you probably enjoyed the new EXs. I could go on and on about how all of these changes revolutionized the game and created the golden age of the Pokemon TCG, but I'll save all of that for a future video. For the sake of these overview videos, I'll be splitting them up by competitive season, beginning with the 2003 to 2004 period, so let's go ahead and start getting into some of the major players in this year's format. Though TPci had taken over, they chose to include the 3 e-card sets as part of the initial format. They didn't just chuck away all of the WotC era stuff that was still floating around. Overall, we had Expedition, Aquapolis, Skyridge, EX Ruby and Sapphire, EX Sandstorm, EX Dragon, EX Team Magma vs Team Aqua, EX Hidden Legends, EX Trainer Kit, and the new Nintendo Black Star promos 1 through 26. And that's just the first year of the EX era. That is a lot of sets for one standard format, when compared to the types of standard that WotC had set up in the years before. The inclusion of the 3 e-card sets allowed for some amazing supporter cards left over from the end of the WotC era to interact and combo with the new powerful Pokemon cards introduced in EX Ruby and Sapphire. Most notably was Oracle paired with Delcatty. It allowed players to draw any 2 cards that they wanted from their deck. Any 2 cards! This combo was made all the more powerful by Blaziken, who could take those discarded energy cards and accelerate them onto the bench. Other supporter carryovers from the e-card sets include Underground Expedition, Copycat, and Professor Oak's Research, just because they provide a solid card draw and add to the consistency of decks. Desert Shaman also offered that card draw and consistency, but with a little disruption to your opponent as well. And of course, Town Volunteers was included as a great way to recycle cards. Among the newly introduced cards, both Steven's Advice and TV Reporter were amazing at draw power as well. TV Reporter was especially good for decks that wanted you to be able to discard energy cards from your hand to the discard, that way you could recycle them right back into play. Professor Elm's training method was back for that quick search and evolution decks, and to help out with that, you also had all the various ball cards that could help you do quick searches for Pokemon. For your gusting and switching mechanics, you had a Warp Point, Switch, and Pokemon Reversal, as well as the new supporter card Mr. Briny's Compassion, which essentially served as a scoop up for any Pokemon you had in play that wasn't an EX. One notable aspect of this first season of the EX era is that there aren't a lot of EX Pokemon being included in decks. One of the biggest reasons for that is because Desert Ruins was the go-to stadium for most decks. Desert Ruins tacked on yet another downside to using Pokemon EX, so if you were building a deck around an EX, you had to make sure that it was the best deck in format, or else you're going to get pinged for it. Well, although there was a lot of EX playtesting going on in this first year, not a lot of EX decks actually made it to the top. The only real notable EX deck in this 2004 season was Gardevoir EX, with the other top-placing Pokemon being single prizers like Blaziken, Team Magma's Groudon, and Gorobus. During this time, the Pokemon Company was also pushing this 2v2 format to kind of mirror the new aspect of the Gen 3 GBA games, where you could do 2-on-2 Pokemon battles. You'll even notice that a lot of cards printed during this era use special wording like does damage to each of your opponent's active Pokemon. However, this idea did not take off. Players didn't really care much for it. They liked the traditional 1v1, and support for double battles kind of fell off. And everything I've mentioned here in this video is really just the tip of the iceberg, even for just this first season of the EX era. I know I said Blaziken and Groudon and Gardevoir kind of topped the charts as far as decks go, but there are a ton of other archetypes just from this first season that are incredibly playable and fun to play. So I hope you stay tuned to the channel for all of these deck techs and other associated videos I'm going to be doing for the entire span of the EX era. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of each of these decks and these videos. Let me know if there are any cards or archetypes that you would like to see featured in this series. I've been working my way up to this era of the TCG for so long through these videos on this channel, so I'm very excited to get into it all. So I'm very grateful to anyone watching my videos here. Social media links are down in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.